we see people who they'll simply throw their foot up onto a bench, a chair, a box like this with a straight knee. They'll either lean forwards or they'll reach forwards and they'll look for that feeling of almost a burning feeling in the back of their knee and associate that with a hamstring stretch. And as long as they're feeling that feeling, they're stretching their hamstrings. Well, the problem is that that feeling is actually tension on your sciatic nerve, and we can prove this. So by just keeping the ankle relaxed in that position, we should actually feel that that burning sensation is less. Whereas if we pull the ankle up towards the shin, so we dorsiflex the ankle like this, you should feel that that burning sensation increases. Now by dorsiflexing the ankle, we're actually pulling on the sciatic nerve from the kind of the bottom end upwards, and we naturally experience, if there is tension in the sciatic nerve, we experience that as either a burning here, a burning in the calf, or even a burning up in the gluteal region. But either way, the ankle has nothing to do with your hamstrings. So simply moving ankle position should not increase and decrease a hamstring stretch. So the feeling you're feeling there, it is not a hamstring stretch. So what I'd much rather you do to feel a true hamstring stretch is start out a little closer to our box or our chair or our bench, foot up on the box. From there, I want you to keep your back straight and think of it as reversing into the movement. Okay, you're going to keep from a bent knee, you're going to keep an emphasis on pushing the hip back. And as you extend the knee there, then you'll feel a stretch in more the mid-belly of the muscle group itself. That will feel very different to the burning sensation in the back of the knee. That is a hamstring stretch. Second example I want to show you is the way in which we can tweak a very straightforward hip flexor stretch to really get stuck into those hip flexors themselves. So a lot of the time when people get into a hip flexor stretch, they simply get into this half kneeling position and they'll lunge everything forwards. They'll simply lunge into this position where they arch their lower back, they rotate their pelvis, and you feel a deep stretch in this region here. If anything, it's kind of a deep groin stretch more than anything else. If we think about what's happening here, let me show you from side on a bit more clearly. In this position, before I lunge forwards, my pelvis is pretty much facing forwards. As I lunge forwards, I rotate my pelvis, and my pelvis is almost facing this way now, rather than facing forwards. In this position, with my pelvis turning around, I'm actually creating a degree of internal rotation and abduction at the hip, which if anything is going to give me a little bit more of a stretch through my deep adductors than it is through my hip flexors themselves. So what I'd rather you do is keep your hips square, keep your pelvis front on, keep your shoulders front on, and just focus on tipping your tailbone underneath you. So again, if the pelvis is a bowl of water, we're tipping the water out of the back of the bowl, and from there, only take a slight shift forwards. That should feel like far more of a stretch down the front of the thigh, at the top of the thigh, really getting into those hip flexors, particularly in this 90-90 position, hip flexor referred to as rectus femoris, rec fem, also one of the quadricep muscles. We'll talk more about him in a second. But with far more of an emphasis on control of the pelvic position, you're going to get stuck right into those hip flexors. Now, you can do exactly the same thing with one foot elevated here, which is a bit more of a psoas stretch, iliopsoas, deeper hip flexor. Again though, what people do is that they will very simply shift forwards into it and rotate round as they lunge. Again, a bit more of an adductor stretch. Think about keeping everything square, tucking the tailbone, then shifting forwards. Again, far more of a hip flexor stretch. Same idea, different muscle within the hip flexor muscle group. Rectus femoris, iliopsoas. Now, building from that, thinking about the way in which we so often see people go wrong with their quad stretching. And this is something that I think we learn socially. We get to the end of a run with our mates or run club or what have you, and we stand around kind of casually stretching like this, not really doing very much. And in fact, if we think about what the makeup of those quadricep muscles, we've got the three vastus muscles, which only cross the knee. They come together at the quadricep tendon here, and with the whole extensor mechanism of the knee, they cross the knee joint, but they don't cross the hip joint. We've got those three, but we've also got rectus femoris, the muscle we mentioned a second ago, which crosses both the hip and the knee. Now, with those vastus muscles, we're not going to be able to very easily actually get into a good end of range stretch because of the simple anatomy around the knee joint and around the thigh. They don't actually pull to a kind of an end of range very easily. It's far easier to really work on those muscles with some foam rolling. And in fact, there's a foam rolling video for your quads, which I'll link up down in the description, that you should go and check out if you want to get stuck into those vastus muscles in particular. However, for one of those muscles, which for us runners tends to get really tight, rectus femoris, there's a massive difference between standing around like this in slight hip flexion and knee flexion, where you're not going to feel very much, versus this, where we're pulling back into hip extension, squeezing your butt, pushing your hips forwards, and pulling back so this knee is behind this knee. That's going to give you a real feeling of a stretch through rectus femoris and give you far more of a quad stretch. Again, try this for yourself. Let me know what you feel in the comments, the difference between being here versus being here. Let me know the difference between those two things. It should feel vastly different. I like to think of a simple cue with this, which is from here, simply bend the knee, stick your chest up, push your hips forwards. That will get you into position. Again, the last thing with this is the difference between being, again, here with the knees together versus abducted. This isn't going to work for you. Try and keep the knees nicely in line together as the first real thing to focus on there.